sending you the most recent version, Mars.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Can I use it?
One university protest at a regents meeting.
I am the vice president of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated Epsilon chapter. Just wanted to welcome you. We're going to get started in a few minutes once Rashida arrives.
Thank you, Kyle. I appreciate it. And I'm really sorry about the changing timing. Senator Bernie Sanders wanted to have a rally tonight, so they came in and were like, "Here's the time," and so it was a little bit hard to push. But I'm grateful that I get to spend the time that I have with you. I'm grateful for you guys creating this space for us. Okay.
Thank you for being present. I'm going to ask that you guys refrain from speaking right now. We're about to text the mics one more time. Thank you.
You ready, Elijah?
Let me just make sure that the time that I have with you, I'm grateful for you guys.
Ready? Test 1 2 3. Test and mic 1 2 3. Test. Test mic 1 2 3. Testing 1 2 3. Test.
Did you find a place to fight?
Test mic 1 2 3. Test.
Over at a lot of like, what time is it over? Yeah, this is over at like 8:30. So like an hour and a half.
Everything's good.
Test mic 1 2 3. Test.
Okay.
This live stream is tricky. Like it's a lot of.
Okay, so we on Twitter and we on
I did have a good feeling what I was doing.
computer, so we don't hear the
I
background.
did have a good feeling what I was doing.
Actually, are you gonna use your computer? No. Okay, can I plug in and monitor the stream from your?
Yeah, that's fine.
Well, it says like approximately. It said approximately an hour and a half.
So this is and YouTube was good. We checked YouTube.
Again, at 7:00. Yeah. It's only, well, I mean, no, it's virtual. It's virtual. No. It's live, but it's virtual. Yeah.
It says one watching
Okay, just find a place to park. It's really not long. Or go get something to eat. To go get something to eat or something. Okay, bye-bye.
Hold up. Since we're not gonna have a stand, we need to talk, make sure this is on. It's on right now. And then if you're gonna put on the table. Test.
Hi, everyone. So quiet. Hello.
Hello.
Hi, everybody. We're going to get started now. We're going to introduce the event, and then we're going to, get started with the questions and everything. Thank you so much again for being here.
Oh, yeah, but don't, because it might make noise. They're about to start. Thanks.
Yeah.
Can you see it? What are the questions
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for being here today. Welcome to When They See Us, a panelist discussion. My name is Jalen Birch, and I'm the president of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, Epsilon Chapter. I'm here with Kyle.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kyle Terry. I'm the vice president of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, Epsilon Chapter. Today we're going to be doing a panelist, like Jalen said, a panelist discussion talking about social impacts on the 2020 election, and we hope that you guys enjoy. We're going to give it over to Jack.
All right. Good evening, everybody. This is not NBC, CBS. We are live from the Michigan Union. My name is Jack Williams III. I am the Step and Stroll Master for the chapter, but tonight I will be serving as the moderator for our panelist discussion. For all of you tuning in at home, thank you so much for being a part of this. We hope you learned something today. And to our panelists, we'd like to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to come talk to us and to educate us. So our panelists for this evening include Representative Rashida Tlaib, Dr. Abdul El Said, Professor Robert Mickey, Professor Angela Ocampo, to my left, student Micaiah Shipp, and to my right, student Sydney Gardner-Brown. So without further ado, let's get started. Our first question for the evening: how is this presidential race different or similar to races that you've seen in the past? And we can open discussion. Anybody can chime in.
Are we able to hear the other panelists?
We should be.
Okay. So is someone? I'm sorry. I can't tell. Okay. So hello, everyone. My name is Sydney Gardner-Brown, and so the question is.
I'll
I'll
repeat it for sure. No problem. How is this presidential race different or similar to races that you've seen in the past?
I would say just briefly, despite the
despite
despite
the
the
fact
fact
that
that
it's,
it's,
it's the type of situation where it's like in the history books, one of we know just from looking at it from the mass media and from the way that it's been publicized that this election year is really different from election years that we've had in the past. But
Specifically, I'll say that I think that
for
for the first time in a very long time, if
if
not for the first time in history,
our
our country is more divided, and this election is riding on a much more divisive
electorate.
electorate.
And
so it's really important that we understand what that means. And from my perspective, I'll say that I'm no expert. I'm a student at the University of Michigan, just like everyone else in this room. But even I can tell as a student studying public policy and as a Black woman in America right now, our country feels like we're not united. And it's always been that way, but it's never been more apparent. So I'll say that that's probably the biggest difference with this election is that it might have always been this divisive, but it's never been this open.
Agreed. Is anybody talking? Or can I?
I think you're good to go.
And coming from a perspective of a first-time voter, this is my first election that I'm able to actually vote in and that I have voted in. I was very young during the other presidential elections, so I didn't really know much about them. I didn't really look into them. And, all I was hearing was what was on the news. And as you all know, the news tells you what they want you to know. I think social media... I think social media has played a really large role in this election, specifically, especially for youth and first-time voters. And that's because, a lot of people try to dismiss youth and just say that we're irresponsibly on social media and that social media is just a way to get, make us toxic and just, fill our brains with nonsense. But I think that's, the complete opposite. I think that social media has allowed youth to have a conversation and a dialogue about the things that we see in the media, because we can't have that in other spaces. We don't have that in school, especially during COVID. We're not even in school. So I think that social media has allowed us to be able to dissect what these presidential candidates are saying on a day-to-day basis and evaluate what they put on their social medias. And I think that we, even though not to say that, these social media platforms are the most credible, I absolutely do think that they prompt people to investigate what they're seeing and not just be complicit in what they're seeing.
Right.
I agree. I think the age of social media has made us a lot more informative, and I think sometimes it is a little hard to decipher, what is fact, what is fiction. I think oftentimes, kind of like Makai was saying, the media spews out what they want us to hear.
Right.
So if they want us to think certain things about a candidate or about just other things like that, it's very easy for them to shape that narrative. And once one person sees that, once they retweet it, once they like it, it becomes a ripple effect.
Right.
And that is what's seen as the truth, whether that is or there's not.
Right.
Would any of our other panelists like to chime in?
I think you got us muted here.
Would any of our other panelists like to chime in?
I really feel bad, but I think we were muted the whole time, so we couldn't hear all the comments.
Oh.
But I know,
Okay.
I think some of the last comments was being a woman of color in our country and how blatant and direct, and then the sound cut off.
Okay. Our apologies. I'll repeat the question. Question is, how is this presidential race different or similar to races that have been ran in the past?
Are we talking about campaigns?
I think campaigns, getting people to vote. I think the whole nine yards.
Well, I just got off doors about a couple hours ago, and what I'm realizing, and we're targeting, basically going to a lot of my neighbors in the 13th district that haven't voted since 2012, which was the last time President Obama was on the ballot. So they haven't been spoken to by any national campaign, any national candidate since 2012. And, you can sense from them that now I think people understand this is not about persuading folks to vote a certain candidate, but persuading folks to come out and vote against hate and against what's happening right now from the White House that's stemming into the structural racism that we see across the country. But I just even speaking to people right now is what was kind of inspiring. This one woman, she got really teary-eyed, and she's like, you know, I know that I'm like, she felt needed this time. She understood that as a Black woman in this country, it wasn't going to be, and it's true, if you look at the numbers, white women or others that are going to choose a candidate that at least understands the stake of our democracy, understand exactly what's going on. And so I don't know if that helps answer the question. Again, what feels different for me, I've always been a field person, and I worked on 2008 Obama presidential campaign. We focused so much on community members without titles. We didn't go to Congress members. We didn't go even, you know, we went to pastors, but not like it wasn't the only thing. Like, what I loved is anybody could walk off the street, come into an Obama campaign office. We'd teach them how to do it, and they would go and talk to 100 people. They got to choose. And it was so cool. I haven't seen that kind of aggressive field, and because people underestimate that direct human contact, and it becomes transactional, not real and genuine. And I think that's what we've lost sometimes in some of these campaigns.
I'll just jump in and add, this is Abdul El-Sayed. The stakes of this election feel so much bigger because, in effect, Donald Trump has put democracy itself on the line. And you know, when you start questioning a peaceful transition, when you start talking about votes being rigged, you're putting the norms and mores of a functioning democracy on the line in an election. And I think that is part of what makes it such a cataclysmic moment for our country. The other part is that we've never had to vote in the middle of a pandemic, and that fundamentally changes the nature of the mechanism of voting, and it changes both the stakes of the election and also the system of the election in ways that you know, can potentially feed into some of the problematic utterances of the president. And so it just feels like democracy itself is on the line, and the lives and livelihoods of potentially hundreds of thousands of people are on the line, and so the stakes are just couldn't be higher.
Absolutely, I agree with that.
Thank you. We appreciate that. I think moving on to our next question. What role do you think that voter suppression will play in the outcome of the 2020 presidential race? How do you think we can combat the surge in these suppression efforts?
I'd like to know what our other panelists have to say about that first.
I guess I'll start because I don't know. I feel like you know, being a first-time voter, I keep saying this, but I feel like it's so monumental during this time. It's because we don't know it to be any different. This is our first experience, and so I've been you know, doing my research, and learned that there are many people who, you know, they return their ballots and then they don't have a signature on them, and then they're not notified, is actually crazy to me. It's crazy to me that there are people out here who may not have ever voted a day in their life, and maybe 70 years old or maybe 18 years old, and they forget something as simple as a signature, and then they don't even know that their ballot has been voided.
Right.
So I won't go on too long, because I do want to hear what the other panelists have to say about this question as well, but I think it's truly heartbreaking to see where we've come, and to see that it's not even really about our people anymore.
Right. I think that, just to echo what you were saying, Micaiah, I think that this whole issue, and like I said before, I ultimately, I really do want to hear what our other panelists have to say about it, but you don't have to be an expert in, you know, in elections. You don't have to be an expert in these things to recognize that this is really, this whole idea of voter suppression is not new, first of all. Obviously, it's not new, and we as people of color, specifically we as Black people, understand just how not new voter suppression really is. And I would just like to say, yeah, it's a systemic issue. It's something that is not going to be fixed because we decide on election day we're going to get out and do something specific, because it's so interwoven into like the very fabric of our democracy to suppress voters that have power, like communities of color. And I'm sure Congresswoman Tlaib could speak to this specifically, considering the demographic that she represents. But yeah, so I mean, I'm saying you don't even have to be an expert to know that. So.
And just to chime in real quickly, I know I'm just the moderator here, but I really agree with what Sydney just said. I think during this election, I have become a lot more informed and a lot more aware of my place in democracy and my place in this country. And for a long time, it felt like, politics, voting, all that, it was just too much to digest in a sense, to where I felt not discouraged from voting, but discouraged from really like researching candidates, from really learning about all the ins and outs, just because I felt like I did not belong.
Right.
But I think, kind of going back to the first question, I think in this race, we're making information a lot more accessible.
Right.
We're making it easier for people like me to realize that you have a place in democracy as well. So I'll turn it over to our other panelists. I just want to add in my 2 cents.
Thank you, Jack. I don't know if they heard you.
They heard, yeah.
Oh, they did? Okay, great.
I'll say something about voter repression. It's horrible and it's illegal, right? A lot of the things that politicians are just saying right now constitute illegal voter intimidation, but trying to figure out the impact of voter repression is harder than you think. I mean, on the one hand, a lot of the people who are most harmed by voter ID laws are exactly, as the Congresswoman was saying, since 2012, they're the people who parties aren't trying to mobilize to begin with. So they're least likely to vote to begin with. But on the other hand, there's really useful anger as a backlash to voter repression. And it could be that more people are going to vote because of voter repression than have been blocked. If you think about how Doug Jones got elected to the Senate race in Alabama in 2017, he was carried there by African-American women who were mobilized in part out of their anger from Alabama's unbelievably egregious efforts at voter repression. So, yeah, I would never say it's a good thing, but the net effects of voter repression this year, I mean, you look at the early voting just in the last couple of weeks has just been unbelievable. In the South too, right? In my home state of Texas, 97% of people in my home county of Travis County, where Austin is, are registered to vote, which is just astonishing, right?
Yeah.
And some of that is due to, I think, this really helpful mobilizing anger that's the result of some of these efforts to make it harder to vote.
Can I say
Really
one
quick.
thing?
Yes,
Professor Okama, really quickly, I just want to let you all know as panelists, just a word from our sound guy, to listen to the audio of us through the YouTube stream. Just we can make sound just a little bit better. We'll be on mute, but you can listen to us through the YouTube stream. But I'm sorry to cut you off, Professor. I just want to let you all know.
That's okay.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. So I think one of the things that I want to say about voter suppression is that I think we need to think about this more broadly. And so voter suppression isn't only in the sense of voter ID laws, but I think what we're seeing this time around is in the way in which rhetoric has been used by elected officials and the president himself, right, to really suppress voters and to embolden others, right? To embolden, for example, a group like the Proud Boys and other white vigilantes, right? And so this is a form of suppression, right? And it's more of an emotional voter suppression as well, not necessarily in the sense of voter ID laws or more sort of strict policy. So I think we need to really think about voter suppression as coming from these other, in many ways, also psychological.
So as somebody that did voter protection during the Kerry campaign, Clinton, all of them, it's not new. They're just getting more aggressive about it. Like I watched at a polling location where I was coming in and English was a second language, voters were coming in And if the names, that's their name, that's their address, they're supposed to be registered there, they would challenge it because there's not a hyphen. So if you know about immigrants, I don't care if you're Arab or Latino, sometimes we have multiple names, grandfather name versus the father's name and all that kind of stuff. And so we saw that kind of pushback. We also have seen a lot of the misinformation out there intentional, but what, much of growing up in Detroit and just, one of the things in high school they did is got rid of like our regular history books and gave us, these big orange, beautiful, big, thick books, the African-American history books, where, you had to do basic math and you had to do all these other things to just even get access to be able to register to vote. And people fought that. Now, though, they're literally taking out voting drop boxes. They are saying, you know what, we only need one polling location for 650,000 people, right? So this is how they're doing it. They're making it harder so there's longer lines. It's more difficult. Sit out in the heat, sit out in the cold, whatever it is, wherever it is in the country. Voter suppression is very much alive and well before as you go vote. But I want a lot of you young people to know this, and this is something I learned the hard way. Voter suppression exists after the election. What I mean by that is if you look at emergency manager laws in the state, where basically people that were elected bodies were removed. These are people we elected, were removed from positions of making choices of where our water was coming from, like in Flint, or during the Detroit bankruptcy, which really impacted a lot of our working families. Developers were just fine, but our families who had pensions and worked for our city got their pensions, got all of that. Our folks that we elected, their decision on our quality of life, on our impact of life was completely removed from. So voter suppression is getting much, much more, I think, in some ways not typical what you might have seen during the civil rights movement, and even during the 70s, as my father would tell you. There was intention of making sure union voter, like they didn't like union voters, so they knew union voters would go and vote for candidates that were going to choose workers before the bosses, as my dad would say. So I think all of us because I remember turning 18 and I remember going with my mother and them telling me I could not go in with her and translate the ballot for her, which is completely incorrect. Absolutely could. Told them, yes, I can. So a lot of that information, a lot of that happens at polling locations. And again, it was always seemed to me always much more difficult than it is. We're lucky in Michigan. Last thing is, as I went door to door, people were like, Rashida, I didn't change my address. I'm like, fine, go to the satellite location. You can register your vote today. New address. You don't have to wait. You register that day, they'll hand you a ballot. That's because people, us, put it on the ballot initiative, not the legislature, not the governor, not anybody. It was the people that put a proposal on the ballot. To that same year, we legalized marijuana. We did promote the vote, which was to basically be able to do same-day registration and be able to have no reason for voting absentee or by mail, which you can early vote, right? And we were able to do another proposal where we had redistricting reform, where it was an independent commission that could come up with the lines that are drawn in our district. So a lot of these transformative and meaningful action we've seen in our country doesn't happen with who's in Congress or who's president. It always happens because us in the streets demand it.
Right.
All right. Thank you for that. Dr. El-Sayed, we know you have to get going pretty soon, but we wanted to know if you had any final words, anything you'd like to say on the matter. Dr. El-Sayed, we know you have to get going pretty soon, but we just wanted to, see what you have to say on the matter, see if you had any final words before you got going.
Absolutely. So, look, there are a lot of ways that voter suppression is going to play into this particular moment. I thought Professor Ocampo's point about psychological barriers and intimidation before people ever get to the polls is huge. But the other side of that is also that, I think that the power of voter suppression gets cut down when we understand that there is voter suppression, right? That the barriers that are put up in front of other folks to go out and vote, the intimidation tactics, the fear, the long lines, that when you understand that that is a tactic that is purposely being used to take away your vote, that it takes away some of its power. And I do think that, this election, given how much voter suppression will be leveraged in the ways that the professor noted, but also, just the elimination of certain voting boxes in places like Texas, the intentional slowing down of the USPS, the way that that voting outside of in-person means in particular places will be made more difficult. The fact that there are huge lines to early vote in places like Georgia already, that when you understand what they're trying to do, you can take away their power. And I think that is really, really critical. And that's number one. But number two, the other way that voter suppression can happen is actually post facto. It's what happens around the counting of votes and around how people leverage the moment and conversation about the moment to muck up the rigor of the election process, to argue that votes need to be counted in a different way, to slow down the counting of votes. And that's something I worry a lot about. And, especially given the way that Donald Trump has chosen to use the paramilitary forces that are at his disposal through agencies that probably should not have the power that they have. The way that he has already cast doubt on vote by mail, the way that he is trying to, in effect, falsify information to raise questions about very particular voting locations. The fact that the Republican Party is no longer under a consent decree around, voter observation. All of these things could be used post facto around suppression. And I think it's critical on all of us to use lowercase d democracy, right? The power of people to demand a fair election if Donald Trump was to call into question unfairly the results of the election. And so I do want us to understand that it's not just about who gets to put in a vote. It's also about whose vote gets counted. And that's another part of it. You're right. I do have to, unfortunately, get going. I hope that you'll forgive me. It was a privilege to be with you. Thank you for raising this important conversation and creating the space to discuss.
Thank you. We appreciate you coming out.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
The awkward Zoom wave
get off is always funny.
So on to our next question. How have the presidential candidates handled the issues of police brutality and racism in the criminal justice system so far? What do you think must be done by either candidate to win over voters, especially BIPOC?
It just seems so obvious. That's why I'm waiting for someone else to speak.
I just feel like I'm talking too much.
Yeah, I was saying.
It's like I'm talking too much.
No, please, I'd love to hear from you.
Look, you all got to check out the Breathe Act, Movement for Black Lives. If we're going to try to truly address anti-Blackness in our country and structural racism and some of these broken systems that have continued to oppress our Black neighbors across this country, then we need to listen to folks that are directly impacted from that. So Movement for Black Lives, if you look at the women, beautiful Black women that have lost their loved ones to police brutality, their own children, some have been impacted by the for-profit mass incarceration in our country, the fact that we haven't addressed poverty. There's so much conversation about who killed George Floyd, who killed Sandra Bland, who killed, and it's important to try to look at justice and policing, but it doesn't go far enough, and we all know this, of what killed George Floyd? What is the system that is in place right now that allows for police to continue to murder people in their own home, like Breonna and others? And so Movement for Black Lives is an incredible movement that I hope folks are following. And the Breathe Act, which goes from reparations down to really truly investing in communities and neighborhoods and really putting a mirror up in our country to talk about some of these, really historic revelations for some of my Black neighbors that our country was builded on some of the same that was created to set up George Floyd's murder. So it really is important that we allow, again, folks that have been directly impacted by these broken systems and truly listen and allow them to lead us in trying to break down, again, truly be able to address racism in our country.
I just wanted to add, I think performative activism has been a beast within the last couple months.
I agree.
I think that what we've been seeing.
I think one of the things I'm gonna keep mine short just because I think
I'll come back.
Concise and sort of brief. I think that the presidential candidates have handled the issue of police brutality and racism in the criminal justice system so far poorly. Both of them have. One, of course, in a horrible way that has undermined the livelihoods of people of color in this country. But that's not to say that we should demand that we shouldn't demand more and better, right? And that we need to engage in demand and action for better and for a stronger stance on issues of police brutality. And I think, following what the Congresswoman said, I think that there are ways in which this can be done, right? But, when it comes to the two presidential candidates, that is just, I think, sort of speaking to how I see both of them, and I think it is expected. We know that Biden is a much more moderate Democrat than some of the other ones that were running in the primary, some of the other candidates. So it was expected. We were expecting this. But that is all just to say that just because these are the options that we currently have doesn't mean that there are other ways in which we can engage and push and demand for better.
Agreed. Ma'Khia, I know you had something to say.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that performative activism has really been a monster the past couple months.
Yeah,
and I
definitely.
think that a lot of what we've been seeing to try to get, the support of people of color, but more specifically Black people, is trying to adopt things that are a part of our community. So the slang, the way we talk, AAVE,
Yeah.
Politicians are going around putting it on shirts. And it's a way to try to get our support and our vote. And I don't think that's the way. This past summer, working with Congresswoman Rashida, I had the privilege of being able to talk directly to constituents. And I think it was very heartwarming for me, but I think it was also very important for the constituents to be able to speak to people in person, actually hear what they need. Because a lot of the times we hear politicians decide what we need, rather than actually listen to what we need.
Yes.
And so I think actually seeing a candidate that's on the ground, putting their people out and learning what's affecting those people will get the support of people of color and Black people. And I think that universally will make change rather than deciding, what our community wants and deciding which ways to get it. And I just think that actually harms us and them more than anything.
Yeah, I just to add to what Ma'Khia is saying and to what Dr. Saeed said earlier today about this whole idea of the lowercase d democracy, the idea that the question ultimately was, which of the two candidates has a good stance on police brutality and racism? First of all, the fact that our identities, that police brutality, that these things are topics, are points for a presidential candidate to have a good stance on is problematic to begin with. But then the next thing is that they are ultimately a part of a system that created the issues that we're dealing with. We're expecting, I think that it's going to be really important, not even to go into history or anything. I'll just speak about it from a forward-looking perspective. I think that it's important that our generation recognize that little d democracy is going to be really important. It's going to be about us as people deciding, we can't ask the system that created the issue to fix it, It's going to be up to us. And I think that, You know, this is something I feel comfortable saying this even with Congresswoman Tlaib, with her history in activism and her resume and like moving forward. Although, you know, we do subscribe, they do serve a very important role in our society. I would not negate to say that, but I will say that I think that it's really important now that the people recognize that it's not going to be solely because we ask Congress to do something.
Yeah.
It's not going to be because the president does something. It's going to be because the people realize, we wake up and go, oh, it's going to be up to us to do what we need to do to move past it. So honestly, both of the presidential candidates, I'll say that neither of them have like Professor Ocampo said, Biden is a very moderate Democrat. He has a tricky history with the issue, but it seems very obvious which of the two would embolden white supremacy versus would be more quiet about white supremacy. I would prefer the person who would not embolden white supremacists.
Yeah.
So that's my answer to that.
Thank you all. Our next question. For voters who may not be persuaded by either presidential candidate because they feel as if their vote won't change anything, how are they right or wrong in your opinion?
I guess I would like to say that voter enthusiasm has been diminished, clearly, this election go around. And I think that, you know, I myself was like, you know, at one point I was like, you know, my vote won't change anything. But when you walk around as a black woman, when you walk on the street and you have a white nationalist president, you have a target on your back.
Yeah.
And people don't realize that that target is not going to go away unless you have somebody who will blatantly and unapologetically dismiss that.
Yeah.
And I think we need that. And I think once we get younger voters to realize that if we have that in office, that things will change socially, like our everyday lives, not necessarily, you know, the legislation won't pass immediately, but, you know, everyday lives, how we live our everyday lives, how we walk across the street, and, you know, our black brothers, how they experience everyday lives. I think once we get people to understand that that will change, is when we can encourage them to know that their vote is important.
Right. And I just was in a voting session with Daniela Gibbs Ledger, and something that she said that really stuck with me was that we need to stop focusing on voting down the ballot and focus on voting up the ballot. And what she meant by that was there's so much more than president on the ballot. There's, I mean, your local legislation, your local legislator, they play a bigger role in your everyday life than the president does, and people don't realize that they should. I think that people I've talked to who feel like disillusioned by the whole voting process don't realize that their vote matters a lot, especially when it comes to their local election and their local proposals and their local, you know, knowing who your district attorney is, like things like that are super, super important. Even if you ultimately come to the point where you're like, I don't feel like my vote for president matters, there are so many other things on the ballot that your vote does matter for. So vote up the ballot and not down the ballot.
I know, Congresswoman Tlaib, you have to get going soon as well. If there's any, no problem. This is all great discussion. I appreciate it. If there's any final words that you would like to say dealing with this topic or anything else, we'd appreciate it.
Yeah, just, you know, I think I said it earlier, but I want folks to know, you know, Grace Lee Boggs in
Detroit, amazing work. Look her up. Really truly believe that transformative change didn't happen in Congress or in the White House. It really happened in the streets. If you all look at any like meaningful action, and yes, I know the civil rights has been watered down, but even that point, even the being able to organize in the workplace, many of you, I mean, even being able to unionize, people died to be able to organize and collectively bargain in the workplace. And even the women's right to vote, even though they left us women of color out. But the point is, all of that to say to you all is it really did happen. And I don't know who the young lady, whoever said it beautifully. It's the consciousness and the wokeness that happens in the community, in the streets, that pushes these institutions forward. And please know, and I think, Sydney, you said it beautifully. It's true. I say it all the time. I'm like, stop thinking just of the names. because you all know where I stood on these candidates. But you know, these are doors and not destinations. These are not just names. They're also issues and values on our ballot. I don't want folks to stop, you know, all of a sudden. And I hear my colleagues saying this, oh, I don't know about doing this UN letter, Rashida, with the Biden-Harris administration. I said, I hope we're still protesting. I hope we're still pushing. It doesn't matter. Our movement doesn't stop because all of a sudden, you know, Trump's gone. He literally, y'all, is just a symptom of just the brokenness and the disease that we have in our country. I don't care if it's corporate greed or racism and all of it, because people are making money off of all of it and off of our pain. So I hope people are connecting that. And I do feel like, you know, I know you don't feel it now, but I do feel like change is coming, because you all are talking in a way that you're this whole new generation that's coming is completely aware of the fact that we have to be much more bold and much more aggressive about these issues and so forth. And more people like us need to run for office. I have to leave you with that. I know you don't, you know, when people asked me to run for office in 2008, the first thing I said was, you want me to sell out? That's exactly my words. And I want you think about it and you're like, oh, I'm not going to go there because you're going to sell, you know, you think that because that's what you feel like they are. They're a bunch of sellouts. And I remember my mentor looking at me, he's like, what, you think I'm a sellout? I said, no, you're different. But in the back of my head, I'm like, but you're still part of the institution that's all jacked up and messed up and really set up, you know. And trust me, when I got there, you all don't think I wanted to run the heck out of the House floor, because I felt like that it was not the institution wasn't built for someone like me, that looked like me, that had my faith, that any of that. And so just know that it's our responsibility, and please be inspired that people like us need to run for office. You know, Micaiah knows that I keep telling folks, you don't have to change a thing about yourself. I will never be the polished politician. I'm just not going to be. I'm always going to be raw. I'm going to be angry. I don't care. I have a right to be. But I think because people like us already, like Cori Bush, went from the streets of St. Louis, like in Ferguson, like fighting for Black lives. And now I told her, don't you leave that bullhorn back behind. You take and you bring it with you. Like, it's so important that you all get, like, we need to get people that will move with a sense of urgency that myself and some of my other colleagues come with. And like, the squad is getting bigger, y'all. Like, I can't tell you, I've talked to Jamal Bowman from New York. You guys may not know some of these people. I'm excited. It's just getting bigger. And we're running like, we want to end corporate tax. Like, we want universal basic income. Like, really? Yeah, we want reparation. I mean, this is what we're saying. And we're still being elected because, one, we do the grassroots, genuine approach. But please, y'all, please think about running for office. You're not selling out. You're actually coming in and infiltrating. If anything, and have fun doing it. Come in there with your beautiful selves and show them that you understand the urgency and you are close to the pain and your lived experience matters. And that's all I have to say. And, you know, Shirley Chisholm, first African-American woman ever elected in Congress, y'all, they put her on agriculture. She's from Brooklyn. They put her on ag committee. You know what she did when she got there? She said, you know, kids can't learn if they're hungry. And she pushed for the free lunch program in our country. And I don't think y'all realize, like, she came in there and she pushed for the free lunch program in our country, which really started with who? The Black Panther movement. So know this, like, all of it is connected to movement work. And we were able now, I can't imagine our country without the free lunch program.
Yeah.
We used to say, right, Kyle? If there's not a seat at the table, bring your own chair. I love her. I do. I swear I loved her. But I'm going to tell you all, it's not about bringing your own chair. It's about taking somebody else's chair, shaking the table, and that's it. Like, it's enough with spreading it, making it, because they trinkle us there, but our voices are still not loud. We're still not heard or seen the same way. So thank you all so much. And thank you for inviting me, Micaiah.
Oh man!
Thank you.
We are so honored that you were able to be here and join this discussion. So once again, just thank you from the bottom of my heart and the rest of the chapter's hearts. We really appreciate you being here tonight, Congresswoman Tlaib.
Yeah, I hope you all are inspired to vote. Just please.
We are.
Get
At
rid of the
least
monster.
we are.
Yeah.
I need him gone.
We definitely
Definitely are. Definitely are.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Okay, so our next question. How does voting for a presidential candidate affect our day-to-day lives?
Can I jump in on this one?
Of course.
I don't have to go anywhere. Nobody wants me to go talk to anybody else, so y'all are stuck with me. I just want to go back to something that Sydney said that's really, really important, that connects with the previous question about police brutality, right? Don't expect a president to do anything on police brutality. I mean, they can make it worse by encouraging police to be even worse, right? By the way they talk, but they can't fix anything. It's a state and local problem, right? So, sorry, what were you saying? Down, up?
Yeah, vote up the ballot.
Yeah, vote
versus
up the
down.
ballot.
Up the ballot, right? That's exactly right. If you actually care about about police brutality, you know, it's almost a shame that all of this, we spend all this time talking about saving democracy, because that allows Biden and a lot of other moderate Democrats not to have to stake out any more progressive position on police brutality, because they're able to say, oh, you people of color, y'all need to vote for us anyhow to save democracy, even if we're not going to do anything on police brutality. But the bigger point is that if you want to do something about police brutality, it's not partisan. Or if it is partisan, it's about doing battle with Democratic, big D Democratic elected officials, right? It's Democratic mayors who are in charge of making sure that police are unreformable, right? It's Democratic mayors who are tied into knots by police unions. That's why even if public opinion changes, police brutality doesn't get any better, right? So voting up the ballot's exactly right. You know, you can elect Biden 10 times, you can elect Kamala Harris 10 times, and that's not going to do anything on police brutality. It's the lower ballot stuff that will.
Can I also make a comment?
Yeah, go ahead.
Makaya made a comment earlier about how about the use of media, of social media, and how it is a tool. And I just recently watched a documentary on Netflix called The Social Dilemma. I'm kind of obsessed with it because, and the reason I bring that up is because with this whole idea of people not understanding the necessity, people are not understanding the necessity to understand their local elections. People don't know that the president, like you said, the president isn't going to change on police brutality. That's not even the president's, I mean, it is the president's jurisdiction. Like you said, our president can embolden white supremacy and can embolden and send in troops, you know, on protesters, and they can do that. But defunding the police, that's something that happens, that's grassroots work. That's something that happens on the streets. And the reason I brought up social media is because just going back to this whole idea of like digital and access and the way that the media is so, you have to watch the documentary. They have done such an incredible, honestly, genius job. If you're on the other side, it's almost like an evil genius job of manipulating our perception of the way that our democracy works. We think that the president has all this power, and we don't have any idea because it doesn't gain views for you to understand what your local, what does the district attorney do? What does what does your this do? What does that do? You don't understand that. We don't even understand what that looks like because we're being manipulated into, we're being siphoned into a certain, into only looking at news that gives the media more views, that gets advertisements more clicks. So I do agree that it is a tool because it connects us, but it'll be really super important, going back to it, it'll be super important for our generation to recognize that we are being manipulated in a lot of ways, and to go the extra mile to communicate with each other using those platforms, using them as tools, but to go the extra mile to actually do research and find out the truth about what our local elections will take from us. So yeah, that was a lot. I was thinking about that the whole time, but thank you for touching on that.
Sydney just said about really the importance of engaging at the local level. I think at the same time, I don't necessarily want to, undermine the extent to which voting for the presidency has consequences. And I think that back when Trump got elected, none of us really thought that things could get this bad. We were not expecting a pandemic. We were not expecting a horrible handling of a pandemic. We weren't expecting every single of his executive orders, which I can think of just one by one, how they have been an assault on immigrants and people of color. So I think that in many ways, I think voting for a presidential candidate does have not necessarily many direct consequences, but indirect consequences that do end up affecting our communities. And so at the same time, right, I do agree with what was said about the importance of engaging at the local level, but I don't want to undermine how thinking about the presidency and thinking about, what was back then the unthinkable became a reality for us. And it's something that our communities have been assaulted in many different ways. And many of those things have come from the presidency itself.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
In other countries, we wouldn't be doing this on Zoom, right? We'd be doing it in person.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
We would be in person.
We would.
And just the number of lives that have been lost, right? It's like we can't forget the death and the violence that our country is experiencing. Like it is just something that that can be single-handedly attributed to the president.
Yeah, it can.
It can.
Definitely.
Totally 100%.
It's a nuanced situation.
It's a nuanced situation. For sure.
Moving on to our next question.
What solutions do you suggest to solve the growing trend of misinformation and partisan bias in the media? Where can people go to get the factual information they need in order to be better informed when engaging civically?
I think that the best way to get information, it depends what kind of information you're looking for, right? We know that people tend to seek information that already confirms their pre-existing ideas and notions about things, right? So that's one thing on one hand. I think on the other hand, if we're really thinking about getting factual information, I think we ought to defer to the experts, right? If we are looking for information about the pandemic, information about health concerns, information about very specific things, we have to defer to those experts. If we really want to track where is our ballot, we have to go to the Secretary of State website, right? I think getting that information from those types of sources is imperative. But I think as easy it is to say that, I think it's harder to tell people and to tell people in our communities that really heavily rely on things like WhatsApp or Facebook or Twitter for news to stay away from those sources. So I think that I often try to shy away my family members from WhatsApp and threads and things that have been passed on from other people that clearly contain a lot of false information. So I think a lot of it comes from, checking in too with our folks and our families and our loved ones and providing that information from them, because we also can tell and have access to be able to better distinguish certain type of information from misinformation, right? So I think that would just be one of the ways in which I try to do it myself with my own family and my loved ones.
And they make it
very difficult.
I was just
saying,
that's a very difficult question. I'm sitting here listening and thinking about it. And especially like me being 18, like growing up and being consumed. Like there was one point where we weren't consumed with technology, but that was like up until like 8 years old.
Yeah.
Right.
Then we were just consumed with technology. Everything was social media based, and we learned to rely on that. And not only because it's right there, but because it's entertaining in a way.
Right.
Because it's satisfactory, because it's something that fulfills the ideas that we already had in our head about a way that something is.
And that's all on purpose.
Yeah,
I'm trying to tell you guys, you have
is.
to watch The Social Dilemma. It's all it's all they do. They do it on purpose. They know what you want to see, so they're literally the algorithm. Okay, I'm sorry.
And it's not even that you can like if you wanted to research it, it's not even that you can put it in Google and find something that isn't equally as bad.
Yeah.
Like you might just find an article that's just as bad. It's just
Right.
telling you the same thing, if not something different that's completely filled with Republican views or Democratic views. So I don't know. Like it's really hard
Yeah.
question. It's really hard. Like where do you go?
I think especially in the age of Twitter, where anybody
Yeah.
can say anything at
Yeah.
any given time with zero consequences whatsoever. Like, it's very easy for that information to get out there, and it's oftentimes it's opinions
Yeah.
disguised as facts.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where it trips me up, because
Right.
it's like, okay, I see a lot of people are retweeting this. I see a lot of people are liking this. Then maybe a few weeks later or so, I'll see something completely different, completely
Right.
contradictory. So it's like, where do we go to decipher this information so that we can be informed and that we can be educated?
Right. And I think Professor Ocampo really touched on something really important. I remember learning about this in like the 6th grade, primary versus secondary sources. Like, you need to be getting your information from primary sources. You need to be getting your information from and it's hard because even sources that you think might be pretty unbiased have their way of swinging your attention to a certain area to get you, to manipulate you. Everything, look, the media is just trying to manipulate us. I don't even, like you said, I don't know the right answer, but I found that the way that I try to receive news, I have several different news apps on my phone, so I can look at it from different perspectives. So if I'm speaking directly to our viewers and you're wondering, okay, none of us have given us, maybe Professor Ocampo definitely did, but we haven't given like a concrete answer. I would just say compare, like start from primary sources, looking on websites instead of, straight on Twitter. Don't get your information from Twitter. If you see something on Twitter that you think is intriguing, don't jump to propagate that information before you do the research and find out from a primary source whether or not it's true, because I would say, this is just an arbitrary number, but like 85% of the stuff we read on Twitter actually is not completely accurate. So I'll say that's for all social media. So just try to diversify your news sources and do your best to sort of get to the root of wherever it came from before you start talking about it, especially before you start talking about it to other people.
I think on to our next question. What do you think can be done to address white nationalism and the surge in hate crimes?
When we have a president that openly dismisses it, I think that's the first step. If we have a president who, I don't even think I need to really go into depth on it because we've seen it, but I feel like if we have a body of people who show that this is going to be condemned, then there will be a fear to do it. They're not fearing anything because they know they have leverage, which is their skin color. Yeah. So if you don't fear punishment,
on a national debate stage, our president literally said he refused to condemn. That's all. If you didn't listen to anything that happened that day, that was the only thing you needed to hear. Yeah. He didn't condemn white supremacy. So
if there's no punishment, then you're gonna keep doing it. If there's no punishment, if there's no retaliation.
But a system that was built on the shoulders of white supremacy is not going to be able to dismantle itself. You get what I'm saying? Like, how we can't expect this system. I go back to this every single question. We are expecting this system that was built on white supremacy to denounce white supremacy when there are white supremacists running it. He was basically saying, I won't denounce white supremacy because
I don't have
me
to.
too. I'm a white supremacist. You know what I'm saying? Like, why would I denounce myself? So I don't know. Any of the professors, do you guys have better? Because I don't know. I feel like it's I don't know. I don't know what's appropriate to say on this kind of platform about what I really think it's going to take to get rid of that as an issue in this country.
So Professor Ocampo, why don't you go first and then I'll go second?
I'll just I think that what I want to say here is that white people need to get their act together and stop being complicit in upholding white supremacy in different ways, because people of color have been fighting for a long time, and I think that one of the ways, and sort of, I agree with you. I think that we need to really think about what are ways in which we can continue to engage, if at all possible, in anti-racist work in a system that continues to uphold white supremacy in many ways, right? Is that feasible? Is that doable? I would like to think that it is possible, in that perhaps we've only gotten to see glimpses of it throughout history, because I don't want to undermine the work that a lot of our ancestors have done for us to get to where we are now, right? And so I think that those are some of the things that do give me hope about the way in which there is a possibility, right? But I think that my main answer to that would just be that we really need to engage in anti-racist work, and that a big part of that needs to come, a huge part of that needs to come from white people.
Yep.
Yeah.
I agree with that 110%.
Yeah.
All right, let's get the white view out there. So, I'm just joking, y'all. We got to lighten up. So, I'm worried. I think it's going to get worse before it gets better. And I think it's going to get worse when Biden is elected. And I think he will be elected, but I think it's going to get worse because so many people are going to see him as not the legitimate president if he's president, right? Because they're going to believe that the election was stolen or rigged or whatever. And I think there's going to be a lot more of this kind of, insane story like we had with this Governor Whitmer kidnapping attempt by these white nationalists, right?
Oh my God.
There's going to be more sporadic violence, like in Kenosha. I'm really worried about the next few years. And I think that, Professor Ocampo knows this research better than I do, so I should shut up, but let me just say it and she can tell me if I'm wrong. It seems like you can't count on white people, and white people don't get better. The way that white people get better is by dying, right? So the euphemism is generational replacement. In other words, racists get old and die, and they're replaced by slightly less racist white people, which is not the most hopeful thing to say in the world, but I think that's true. Like, white racial attitudes are improving, but they're not improving because people sat down with the good book and then decided that they were going to become an ally.
That's true.
Attitudes got better because old people like my, hate to say it, but like my grandparents were replaced by people who grew up in a more tolerant world, right? So I kind of feel like we have to ride out this transition to this demographic transition. Right now, there are so many white people who are anxious about whites losing their status as the demographically largest group in the country. And, that transition of white people getting their heads around being in the minority finally is, that's going to take a while. That's going to take a couple decades. So you guys are going to be middle-agers like us before. I think that gets a lot better.
I wonder if
that's not the most hopeful thing to say, but so I'm going to shut up.
I wonder if it's any different in the age of technology. Like, maybe over the past several hundred years, it was like the dissemination of knowledge wasn't as rapid. So maybe that was the case. But now that we're in an age where we can share knowledge more quickly, hopefully that's not the case, because I honestly feel like it's going to take, like Professor Ocampo said, for white people to feel like their liberty is tied into the liberty of the oppressed people. Like, white people, complicit white people, especially complicit white people, are going to have to feel like if they're helping, not because they're helping black people, but they're helping because they're helping humanity as a whole, And I think right now, especially, I've seen research recently that says that since the George Floyd murder happened, white support for Black Lives Matter has decreased like tenfold. Across social media, they've been tracking how, Google searches and things like that. Like you said, performative activism, and so like And I think ultimately the solution is that, well, the problem is that those white people who were performing their activism, they didn't really feel like they were connected to the issue. They thought that they were doing something good for another group of people, but they didn't feel like solving police brutality for people of color is ultimately solving the issue for everyone. So it's going to take, yeah.
I mean, white people are killed by cops all the time, right? Yeah. But they can't get their heads around it because they see their racial privilege at stake. I do think though that even after there was more kind of violence, even if it was anarchist violence, Kenosha, wherever, there's still more support for Black Lives Matter now. There's a lot more support than there was 6 months ago. And that's like you, though, probably driven, and again, we should ask Professor Ocampo, I think that's more driven by younger people, right? These marches in big cities are very multi-racial, multi-ethnic, right? But they're also young, which gives us, as Sydney's saying, reason to be hopeful.
Yeah. Definitely. I just want to really quickly thank you all for being here tonight. I think we've had some
amazing discussion and some amazing dialogue. I just want to wrap everything up with our final question for the evening. What role do you think the ongoing COVID-19 crisis will play in the November election? What can be done to ensure that this election is free, fair, and secure?
I guess what I will say is that I think it's changed people's values for what they see in a president. I think the 211,000 deaths that we've seen has really put people into perspective. People have lost family members, people very close to them. And I think now it's more important for them to be able to see who will mitigate this virus if put in office. And I think that COVID obviously is important not only for people who have lost family members, but also for students. Are they going to go back to school in a safe way? Are they going to take a gap year? It's affecting everybody, not just, one group of people, not just Black people, even though we're disproportionately affected by this virus, like every other thing. But I think it's important for all voters. And I think that's the difference between a lot of other topics, is that not all of those topics are affecting each and every group. Right. So I think that's definitely the role that COVID plays in this election, and I think it'll definitely decide who will be the president.
Yeah.
I think that, please go.
Oh, you can go.
I was just saying in terms of going back to the question about voter supremacy. Voter supremacy. I wish there was voter supremacy, but there isn't. Actually, the opposite, voter suppression. That's obviously playing a big role. I remember when we were voting in the primaries over the summer, and there was, I cannot remember what state this was in, where they had their primary, and like several of the poll workers contracted the virus, and some of them, like one or two of them even died, and it was a huge thing. I cannot remember what state that was in, but I worry about things like that happening again for people who. I'm also just worried about them being able to. What we saw over the summer with UPS, I'm afraid of the voter suppression that could happen if they manipulate the mail-in voting system. And I think that we sort of like made that a trendy thing, and we sort of acted like it was like, but we don't realize how horrible it really would be if the if the post office was not able to. It could completely change the trajectory of a lot of like capitalism and just our entire democracy as a whole, especially right now because people can't go to vote in person. And like specifically in counties like in large counties in Texas where the governor has decided that they're only going to put one drop box in the entire county. Counties that have thousands and thousands and thousands of people, all of which need to vote in the election. There are just going to be, I think that for the next couple of weeks, we're going to see little things happen like that. And it's just, I think that's going to be the impact. And it's all mostly where the catalyst was COVID-19 happening. And so now there's more room for flexibility because now people can vote absentee and they can vote in person, whereas usually people would just opt to vote in person. But with that flexibility comes the flip side of that coin, which is like the system being able to find ways to suppress people's votes if they don't go vote in person. And then you worry about if I know people are going to suppress my vote if I don't vote in person, then I go vote in person and then worry about contracting the virus. So then it's like this weird, you have to figure out what's best for you.
Yeah. And some people don't have that option. Some people are immunocompromised, elderly, they rely on the mail-in system.
Right.
So,
Right.
Definitely.
And if they don't get it in at the right time of day or the right day,
yeah, because it's not
it won't get in and you can't get vote on counted.
Yeah, it's not postmarked.
Right. If you don't get your signature the right way, if it's not the one on the drive. And also there's all this fake news being disseminated over the internet about whose vote gets counted. If you mess up on this, they won't count it. If you mark the wrong box, they won't count it. All this stuff. I'm not saying it's all fake news. A lot of it is real news, but now people are unsure about what the truth is about what's going on with the ballots. There are sources that tell you exactly how to do it, but those are not the sources that are being pushed out into the media through social media. You know what I'm saying? So now people don't know. They feel disillusioned about in-person voting. They feel disillusioned about absentee voting, and so, yeah, ultimately it's like going back to the cause, like you just need to do the research and find out what's best for you and just be on top of it. Just stay on top of it.
You shouldn't have to do research. Like voting shouldn't be a life or death act, right?
Yeah.
And it's not just COVID. The problem is that taking the virus seriously became partisan. In a certain set of countries with populist leaders like President Trump, right? So he made mask wearing and worrying a partisan thing. And so that meant Democrats were going to be more likely to vote by mail. And so that meant let's mess with voting by mail. And so now Democrats have to, like you said, like put on 2 masks and risk their life to vote, which is ridiculous, right? Yeah. And of course, it doesn't have to be that way. You shouldn't have to be able to do research to figure out how to vote, right? It should be really straightforward. But yeah, so it's not just the pandemic, it's the fact that the pandemic became itself a partisan issue.
Right.
And that's why we're in this, like you said, this position of old people feeling like, well, I might die, but it's important, so I should have to do it. And they shouldn't have to go through that kind of anguish. It's crazy.
Oh my gosh.
All right.
That kind of
I just said the word anguish. We can't stop on that. We got to say something else.
I'll stop on something. I'll stop on.
Professor
I'll try to
Ocampo, bring us all home.
Please bring us home.
I'm sorry. I agree. I think that people shouldn't have to risk their lives to go vote. So just to answer the question, I think that the ongoing COVID crisis has really completely changed the way that a lot of people are going to be voting because of the pandemic. But I think it's also going to bring to bear a lot of things that people are experiencing, from immediate family death to the extreme economic circumstances that they are under because of the pandemic, but also issues of healthcare, which also have been exacerbated by the pandemic, right? So it's the intersection of all these things that it's really going to be people's minds when they're trying to go vote or try to figure out how to register and go through the absentee process and mail their ballot and track their ballot to make sure it got there and so on and so forth. So I think that that's the way in which it's really affecting the election. I will say though, that what we can do, and just to go back to this, because I think it's really important, I think that many of us, what we can do to make sure that our friends and our family and loved ones have less anxiety about this is to walk them through the process and to help them out if we can, right? Or people within our immediate circles. And so I recently had a conversation with my sister about my parents' ballots because we wanted to make sure that they were voting. And she told me that she had requested their ballots to come in the mail. And I think it was like a week and a half later, we forgot to follow up. And then we called them and we realized that their ballots had been sitting in their mailbox, but they just hadn't gotten to them, right? So, even just, and it was like, it just hadn't crossed them. They were so worried about a lot of other things because my mom had to go back to work and she's being anxious about that too. And so ensuring that the way that you can possibly help your folks and family and friends and other people who are anxious about the process, giving them, reassuring them, giving them information about, yes, you can mail it up until this point. Yes, let me tell you how to go about this. It really demystifies the process for a lot of people that otherwise don't have the availability or the resources to be able to do it on their own. Right. So I think we do have to take ownership in that way, in that I think we can help those who are feeling anxious about the process within our own communities. And we know that it's far too many, unfortunately, but I think that there's ways in which we can actually engage and help them out.
Thank you.
This was a much better ending.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So to all of our panelists, Professor Mickey and Professor Ocampo, we thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule to come and talk to us today. This is a very much needed dialogue, and we appreciate you all's expertise on the matter. And to Micaiah and Sydney as well, the chapter would like to thank you all. We wanted to have student speakers, student voices on here because this is a lot of our first presidential elections. I know it's mine. Sydney and I are the same age. We turned 18 like right after the last election. So it was kind of like, oh my gosh, like we felt so powerless, but now we've had the time to do the education, do the research, and now we feel empowered and ready to go vote. So I thank you all for being here tonight. And for those tuning in at home, thank you so much for joining us. We hope that you learned something. And join us tomorrow for our final event in our Voteless Mini Week for our national program of Voteless People is a Hopeless People. We'll be having a similar discussion about the election with Senator Jeff Irwin. And please stay tuned for all of our voting efforts and making sure that our campus community is educated. We also are running a campaign with our We Vote t-shirts. So please check us out on Instagram and Twitter at Ice Cold Alphas, and we can get you a shirt. And with that, we're going to call it a night. No problem. Thank you.
It was wonderful meeting you all.
Thank you for all the work that you're doing.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Journalism. They can't.